So is Mr. Park still joining us?
He is. He just SMS me to say they are still in the Congress.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering if maybe you are not cutting it thin by having him.
I know.
Considering Congresses are very unpredictable.
Yeah, no, definitely. Especially after that they did to go at it. Did you follow that?
Because apparently, well, I didn't follow it, but apparently people were not necessarily wanting him to speak. Did he eventually speak?
He didn't. He actually finally left. I saw it yesterday.
Wow.
I was listening to the news yesterday, and he was on his way out, and they were like, "We'll be damned if we're gonna listen to you." Oh wait, that's it.
Hey, Xolisa.
Okay, this one.
I'm calling Janwen.
I'm all good. I'm all good. Just tired. I'm full pumula, man. So, but otherwise, I'm good.
Xhanti is making us work after hours.
I know. You know, look, what we're going to do, I mean, we could make it in, but I would like, to get into the things and then also to put this as a record. There's a lot of people who are like, we're worried about load shedding, blah, blah, blah. So I think there's a big concern around load shedding. I can't believe this thing is touching every part of our lives. Like there's no place load shedding is not grabbing. It's driving me crazy.
And it's crazy when you see what it's doing to small businesses.
Yeah.
I have a cousin who does hair. I normally would go to him for a haircut. But for the past couple of weeks, and I'm very random when I come for my haircut, it's not regular, so I'll be like, as in I have a chance out in your salon, speed. Every time I go there, there's no power. And at some point I bought him those chargeable clippers. Because I'm like, dude, there's no way you're gonna, earn any money if every time there's load shedding, you can't touch someone's head. And he's a barber. So,
and we know you and your hair.
and it's I could find it, I like to at least, look neat. But I also like the nails, like I wanted to get gelish, like clear gelish. And the lady was like, hey, I can't work because lentole doesn't dry on its own. I didn't realize until I went there during load shedding. And she's like, no, we need electricity to make this thing run so that we can actually dry your nails. I'm like, yo, this is bad because these are long hours of
apparently the Joburg market is struggling, apparently. I mean, if you think about fresh produce, and it needs energy overnight to keep those things fresh, and then they've got sprinklers, they've got refrigeration, all of that, and they struggle because so I think we are in major trouble. I see people are starting to join us, so we will start without Mr. Parks because of the program.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to change dongles.
I know. You have to, because things could go very wrong.
Yeah, the other one was not looking so good.
You mentioned that there was somebody else who's joining the panel. Are they still coming?
He texted me to say, let me see if actually he has said anything. I've got someone who's going to be watching for him if there's any problems. But he earlier said he let me know closer to the time, but it looks like they're still in Congress. This is Matthew Parks. who is the parliamentary coordinator for Khoza 2 and I think between and government and policy and whatever. So he's the guy. I saw they released something yesterday talking about the same thing about how unhappy they are that those amendments that allow them to withdraw early have now been pushed to 2024, I think it is.
Yeah, it's the two-pot system.
Hey,
What a disaster.
please don't ask any controversial political questions.
Well, I mean, we'll get into that because I think this is something that we've been through throughout COVID. Remember that during COVID, people were really, really hopeful that they would there would be some, I guess, they'd get some reprieve because they could access some of their funds, and so I think it's been quite a disappointment for many people who've been hoping.
Hey, it's causing headaches because the administrators of pension funds are like, how are you going to do this administration?
That's the thing.
Number one, we are already struggling with very vanilla administration of someone withdrawing and the rigmarole of just getting someone to be able to withdraw his admission. Now you're going to have two parts where you're going to force people to preserve some of it and then can access 1/3. Matter there's a minimum. Hey, it's a mess.
Yeah, I know. What I'm going to do, I'm going to give us 1 more minute and then we're going to start, and then people can find us where we go. Because we are recording, this will be available online across platforms, so it will be reachable. So maybe like 1 more. All right, let's begin. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having been able to join us. For those of you who have, we know that there are lots of challenges to being able to participate in things like this. List of all the shortages we have and energy. Maybe by the end of this, many people will be convinced to put in more money into energy. Let's see. So this is the second the second installment of our webinar series called "Making Finance Work for People," which is a 4-part webinar series. This really was brought about by the fact that we are always talking about inclusive growth, and that has been a long and wanted goal for the South African economy. And really, when we talk about inclusive growth, we really talk about the combination of increased participation of poor people and the marginalized in a growing process of the economy, such as employment. And then, of course, increased sharing of the benefits of such growth. And that means really thinking about increased social expenditure, including capacity building and training, and of course, rising incomes for all. Now, the South African economy has grown over a period of time, but unemployment has hardly reduced. We know that unemployment now is at some 14.9 million people, or nearly 40% of all South Africans, and at the level where it has been since 2008, or the financial crisis. We also know we've got 16.9 million South Africans who are living in poverty. This is something that should trouble all of us. Now, also, we know the role of finance has been very, very important in some of the crises that we've seen in our different economies, but also know that finance could be a solution towards economic development and inclusion. So we have to work towards making sure that everybody understands the role of finance, how it impacts their life, and the kind of knowledge and decisions they can take to make sure that all of us, whether it's women, young people, workers, can engage with policy instruments, we can engage with financial developments, and contribute to the kinds of decisions that allow us to contribute positively to economic growth and development. So this second webinar called Making Finance Work for the People, which is brought to you by, in association rather with the Club of Rome, is about making sure that workers themselves participate in these kinds of discussions. And we ask the question, how can workers direct their pensions to work more, work for more and for better jobs? I've got a great panel with me today. I'm very, very excited. Amanda Khoza. Amanda Khoza has experience who spends over 23 years in accounting, asset management, research, and socio-economic development programs in the financial services sector. Her directorships includes being the vice president of the Institute of Retirement Funds Africa, or RIFA. She holds an MBA in finance and strategy, focusing on financial inclusion, and a master's in management and finance and investment focused on impact and sustainable investing. I'm very, very happy to have her here. And we also have Xolisa Dhlamini. Xolisa is a financial services professional with over 17 years of work experience. He is currently the managing executive for distribution at Sanlam Corporate. He holds a master's degree in development finance from UCT. He also holds a chartered development finance analyst designation from the Chartered Institute of Development Finance and a certified environmental, social, and governance analyst designation from the European Federation of Financial Analysts. So prior to joining Sanlam Corporate, Xolisa was faculty at the UCT Graduate School of Business, or UCT GSB, teaching and supervising postgraduate students research in sustainable and responsible investing. Lastly, we'll also be joined by Matthew Parks. Matthew is the parliamentary coordinator for the Congress of South African Trade Unions. He coordinates COSATU's engagements with Parliament and government and the African National Congress on bills, on policies, regulations, taxes, and he also works in terms of NEDLEC and the bilateral engagements with business and industry bodies and companies. He has a Bachelor of Social Science degree from the University of Cape Town and a postgrad diploma in governance from the University of the Western Cape. I think that one of the things that we know, we know that at the moment, COSATU is in Congress, so Matthew Parks might be able to join us a bit later. He said that he will participate, but we will go on without him. I want to start this conversation really with you, Xolisa, because I think we want to start right at the beginning, right? We all know that we all have retirement savings, we have pension funds, at least those of us who have jobs. But really, what do we know about retirement funds in terms of actually before we retire? A lot of people, I actually was asked this, I was on Umhlabeleni yesterday, and I was really asked, how do we know whether or not we have a retirement fund? And how does that actually show up? And I thought that was a surprising question because this was from somebody, who's working in, I mean, apart from the fact that we know that we've got deductions, how do we actually interact with our own retirement fund?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be on this panel. Yeah, I think that's a great question to start with because when you look at, I think a great way to look at it is understanding the structure of a retirement fund and the governance of the retirement fund to be able to then answer the question, how do we even engage with this retirement fund? So as you have put it, quite a lot of the bulk of the retirement savings are through occupational retirement funds, meaning that it's a retirement fund that you belong to by virtue of being employed by somebody who's basically then deducted retirement savings from your salary on a monthly basis, and the salary then gets, this portion of your salary goes into the pension fund, which is governed by a board of trustees. And this board of trustees would typically be elected by the employer, who sponsored the existence of the retirement fund, as well as those trustees who are elected by members. members who are employees who've elected amongst their own representative who would then make decisions around the management of the retirement funds that are deducted from all the employees in the company. And when you look at the statistics really around retirement funds, quite often we hear that retirement funds through the occupational route are normally either the only savings mechanism or the biggest saving mechanisms for individuals. So outside of occupation or work-related pension funds, you're not necessarily seeing a lot or a large bulk of the population, investing for retirement through the likes of retirement annuity funds, for instance. So the bulk of it is related to work. And having listened to the stats that you've just shared, it becomes very difficult then for individuals who are not in the work environment to be part of the retirement fund industry. But it's not impossible. It's just difficult because quite often that is the biggest and probably the only saving mechanism for retirement funds. And the idea of these retirement funds is to then enable members and individuals who are working in these companies to save for when they stop working and stop being active as employees. When they're now in retirement, they need to be able to draw an income from the savings that they have accumulated during their working lives. So the retirement savings, the retirement fund is this vehicle that allows for that investment and the savings towards retirement so that individuals are not heavily or entirely reliant on, grants from the government, etc. So that is in a nutshell. I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah, I think we were talking earlier about the kind of people that are involved. I think we talked about the people that are in control of this as the worker and the employer who helps contribute to that. In what way is that power divided? It's my retirement fund. Why should my employer have any decision? Because I want to think about it as they are contributing on your behalf. So why are they even engaged in choosing the trustees or the people who to be entrusted with? Because you think they give you that money and you do it, it is yours, right? It is for your retirement.
Yeah. I think it's mainly because when you look at just the why retirement funds exist, especially those that are occupational and linked to an employer, it's effectively a benefit that the employer makes available to its employees. So that's why we refer to it as being sponsored by the employee. So the employee or the employer, the company that hires you would then offer retirement funds and medical schemes as a benefit to either attract, talent into that company, but also retain talent. So that, I'm well taken care of in this company, and for my future, I'm able to do that. So it is. So I think it becomes difficult to exclude the employer from the governance, because the reason why that pension fund exists is because of that employer. So with the governance structure, then it becomes the governance structure then becomes a balance between the various stakeholders who are impacted by the existence of the retirement fund. Yeah, so that's why normally, in a well-functioning board of trustees, you would have those that are elected by the employer, who sponsored the existence of this particular pension fund, and employee elected members who would then also advance the interests of the employees around the running of the fund.
I asked this because I think it might be central to the discussions we'll have later. One of the things we know, you get paid, one of the benefits you get from working is your salary, right? And the employer does not participate in how you may distribute that salary, whether or not you will spend some of it, supporting your kids, or some of it doing everything. So I think it's quite interesting that in this particular thing, you actually want them to, they do participate. Which leads me to my second question. We said this when we were preparing, that there's a lot of talk about ESG and sustainable investing. I want you to talk to us in simple terms, and I think actually you'll be educating me here on how ESG comes into people's pensions and how they're invested, and of course this responsible investing. Again, because I think this also speaks to the people that own this kind of thing should have all the decisions. What are these other frameworks that are being brought into the discussion?
Okay. No, thank you for that. When you were opening, you spoke to economic development, right? the idea of and the idea is to say how can we make finance work in such a way that it contributes to economic development. And what has spurred the increase or the big focus on environmental, social, and governance factors, these E, S, and G aspects that we talk about, is arguably, one of the historic influences of us even speaking about E, S, and G is the concept of sustainability. To say, what are the pillars of sustainability of any market, especially when it's linked to growth? The idea was to say that if we are going to grow as economies, we need to do so sustainably. And what do we need to consider? There are certain aspects that we need to consider. There's economic sustainability, where that, the rands and cents of all the activity that we're doing to grow, but also social sustainability, to say, to what extent is this then including society and beneficial to society as a whole when we are looking at growth strategies by companies and organizations that we plant our money in? To what extent are they thinking about the social sustainability of what they're doing? And then the additional pillar is also then around the environment, to say, in all the activity, economic activity that we take part in, to what extent are the activities allowing for environmental sustainability, meaning that can we do what we need to do today, but still enable future generations to be able to grow? And when you look at the basis of the club of Rome being formed, was to look at how do we make sure we grow in a sustainable way. And so when we speak about E, S, and G, they really are linked to sustainability pillars. But why does this matter? So when you're in a pension fund, for instance, the time that you're accumulating your assets and your savings for retirement is anything from 40 years, 30 years, 20 years, depending on when you start the work in the work environment. And by the time you retire, you need to have accumulated these assets. And this accumulation does not happen on its own. It means that, these contributions that are deducted are invested for these 40 years that you are, in the working environment. So it's really important then for the markets that you are investing in to be sustainable, so that you are able to take the money and invest it. So then when you start looking at E, S, and G, it's really around how are these aspects from an environmental, social, and governance aspect impacting the sustainability of the investment performance that you would need to grow this to grow the assets that you want to accumulate your retirement fund. So then it really is around, are there E, S, and G issues that are risks? Are there E, S, and G issues that are opportunities? And are there E, S, and G issues that can create an impact over and above the financial return that I can get? And this impact can be a social impact or an environmental impact. So when you then look at our Regulation 28, which in 2011 was amended to explicitly include the principles for the Board of Trustees I mentioned earlier, to incorporate environmental, social, and governance factors as far as they may impact the success of investing successfully, but also being able to be sustainable with the returns. And that's where the E, S, and G aspects and the sustainable investment aspect becomes important for the pension funds, not only because, there's this principle from a regulatory perspective, but it really is about making sure that the pension funds themselves as a vehicle can live up to the promise which is made to the individuals, to say, after you've worked 40 years or 50 years, you'll be then able to accumulate money so that you can buy your pension, whether it's a living annuity or a conventional annuity. And so if you don't really consider the risks that come from an environmental or social aspect, or you don't consider the opportunities, it may impact the financial return that you need to accumulate the assets in a fundamental way. So that's why it has become important.
Now, this is an interesting part, because part of the reason we are holding these discussions and trying to obviously get people engaged is that we want workers to have a voice, and we also want them to sort of think about these things in the way they affect their lives. As you were talking, I hadn't thought about this, but we know In the mining sector, for example, investment, many banks, many investors are saying, we are going to move away from investing in coal or in dirty energy. We want to go into clean energy. We want to go into sustainable energy. But also know that can mean loss of jobs. So there's this one part where we are having a discussion where we want workers to say we want our money to be invested in an environment or towards a place that helps us create the jobs. As I understand, a lot of the environmentalists, so it is this environmental sustainability part of it, says let's actually not invest our money there because we're polluting and we're harming the future. How do we balance those two things? I mean, I expect that if the worker here was a worker who's from coal and they're deciding about their pension fund, they might want investment into coal rather than not into coal.
Yeah, and I think that's where the whole governance structure becomes important, because these boards of trustees that have been elected by members, but also the employer, are the ones who would then have to grapple with that decision to say, do we go with coal or not in that particular example? But I think just when you then look at, in principle, those boards of trustees, because like I mentioned that they're elected, they have been given a mandate by the people, right? To say, you are going to take care of the money that we are entrusting you with as our trustees. But that responsibility or that liability or mandate comes with responsibilities to make sure that decisions are made in the best interest of the fund, so that the fund can continue and deliver on the promise to all the various individuals, right? So when you have this dilemma of saying, okay, do we disinvest completely from coal or not? The board of trustees needs to weigh up what the options are, because it's one thing to disinvest, but that money needs to be invested somewhere. So if you can find opportunities, investable opportunities that will absorb the money that is coming from coal and be invested in a different way and still generate a return, then it becomes almost a no-brainer for the board of trustees, because then they can say, okay, we can actually divest completely. But in the South African market, it's very difficult to play the complete divestment approach to say we're going to take our money out of coal, because as you mentioned, it has a number of knock-on effects, including an effect on employment. So these board of trustees and the fund managers that they delegate the investment decisions to now need to grapple with balancing the need to generate the financial return, but also make sure that it's done in a sustainable way. So if the green economy is going to be a more sustainable way of generating growth and returns, then it must be something that the board of trustees need to think about. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they must divest, because they could also stay invested if the financial aspects are still sensible, and be engaged investors. So part of what is expected from a responsible investment perspective is that investors and boards of trustees engage with these companies to find solutions to push them or influence them to become better in terms of moving towards the green economy. So that engagement process falls away if you completely disinvest. So in the South African market, you're finding that a number of investors are grappling with the two. So they're not saying I will only do one. Some are able to do that, but others are opting to say, let's stay engaged and let's influence, your polluters and the ones who emit greenhouse gases to find better ways of operating in such a way that they are not harming the environment, but also they are also preserving jobs, because even within the green economy, you need to take people on board. Yes. So if, let's say, someone is losing a job in the coal mining industry, they need to be absorbed into another aspect of the market in this green economy. And this is the whole concept of the just transition. So when you are a board of trustees, you have to now think about all these things in making sure that you're making decisions that are in the best interest of the fund, which includes this key stakeholder, which is the individuals. And sometimes, you know, as a board of trustees, you won't necessarily make a decision that everyone is happy with, but you need to make sure that the decisions that you make as a board stand up to scrutiny around all these various issues around returns, greener economies, and social justice, etc.
All right. I think that takes us actually segues me really nicely into some of the questions that Amanda will talk to us about. Firstly, what is this relationship, Amanda, between fund trustees or board of trustees, workers, and even fund managers? What is that relationship? How does it actually operate? And how does it actually work when it works well?
Thanks, Xhanti. Actually, I just wanted to mention that I was a student of Xolisa, incidentally,
Wow.
when I was at UCT. Yeah, but we knew your question. I'm going to repeat some of the things that Xolisa has mentioned. I think just for purposes of emphasis. I think so often when we talk about matters or the ecosystem of the retirement fund industry, we talk the jargon, and because that's what we work with and deal with on a daily basis. So I'm just going to try and break it down to layman terms that we use ordinarily, and hopefully our attendees will start drawing a picture as to how this relationship occurs and how they can get involved in driving and holding this relationship accountable. So as Xolisa already mentioned, workers belong to a retirement fund that is typically approved by the employer. And the employer will draw contributions from their salary and pay it over to an administrator. And the administrator and the fund manager are the ones that liaise on the movement of these fund monies, okay? And this is whether for investment or for withdrawal. So when the money is paid over, the trustees of that retirement fund then instruct the fund managers of the fund to invest it in accordance with the investment policy statement. So there's a mandate that they have embedded in the investment policy statement. And that mandate says where the money must go in terms of the portfolios that are suitable from a risk and return perspective for the members of that fund. Okay, the trustees have been entrusted, and that's the reason why they're called trustees. They are entrusted to make decisions. Xolisa used the term delegated, to make decisions on behalf of the fund managers as to who their service providers should be, including which fund managers to appoint. And in essence, the workers are given portfolio options by the employer and from where their contributions should then be invested. And then the trustees then carry out that instruction. I just wanted to note that in keeping with tonight's topic and some of the comments that Xolisa has already shared, is that the workers are not initially investing for purposes of sustainability when they make the election of portfolios. They are initially selecting portfolios based on their risk profiles. So what this means is that their risk tolerance and their horizon investing are the key factors in their decision-making. So a conservative portfolio selection, for example, will mean that the individual is more risk averse or intolerant or perhaps closer to retirement. And an aggressive portfolio means you can take on more risk. So younger workers will take on more risk, whilst older workers will typically take on less risk. Okay, so these are the traditional allocations. But like in many things, what is typically articulated is that high risk portfolios will target a higher return, whilst lower risk portfolios typically have lower return outcomes. But the allocation is obviously to protect a member's investments. So the fund managers are then the investment experts who take this into consideration when they invest. And what they're trying to drive are inflation-beating returns. So that fund managers also understand what investment strategies work hopefully in different market environments. And they put in place long-term strategies per the mandate of that IPS or investment policy statement. I think what is quite important to highlight is that this money is ordinarily meant to be for retirement. And that is, it is supposed to be accessed only when one retires. So in an ideal environment, a worker would keep growing their retirement pot beyond their current job. And we've heard a lot about poor preservation concerns, where employees will withdraw all their money when they change jobs and spend it. And that would leave a gaping hole in their retirement pot. And they would ultimately need to be reliant or dependent on either members of their family or the state. So some of the legislation is currently changing and is addressing some of these actions per your introduction. And this should be for the long-term benefit of workers, as well as addressing the immediate need to access some of these funds. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now.
So, I mean, you've said a number of things here that I think are very, very important to zoom into. So the first one was that right at the beginning, I mean, I guess not all of us would have been there when this was all consolidated. But at some point we arrive at work and somebody says, look, this is where your pension, is going to go. And you mentioned things around the fact that, they will say, if you're young, I guess you will say, I want the big, I can take the biggest risk. If you're older, you may want to take less risk. You also talked about this idea of inflation beating returns. So basically, you want to earn more than what inflation is. But one of the things I think everybody keeps talking about is, why is there no investment in South Africa? Why are we not investing? Where is the disjuncture between, these people that are not investing? Because I mean, the pension funds, so many workers complain all the time. They keep saying, our money is not being invested in South Africa. There's an investment strike. Why is that related? I think it's a very important relationship, because you're saying this is the workers' pension. They can choose, whether it's long-term or short-term. They can make a decision about where to invest. And they keep saying at the same time, nobody's investing in our economy. We can't invest in these jobs. And I think it also speaks very much to the question I was asking Xolisa earlier around whether or not investing in coal is a thing, or whether or not people say, we want to invest our money in coal because that's where we work, that's where we want jobs.
Well, there's two ways to address.
Yeah. Go ahead. No,
yes, ask the question. Sorry, you keep breaking. I think it's load shedding. That's where the investments can start. And power generation.
Reliable power.
Yeah.
So that's exactly, so that tension between all of these things that you're talking about and who's actually choosing, and why we are not getting the choices that everybody wants, keeps actually putting forward, because I think that might be that relationship between the fund managers, the investors, I mean, the savers or the workers, and perhaps the employer or the trustees. Why are we still in this position?
Well, we're in this position because there are, different ways to define what is sustainable and what is the value that you're trying to derive from your retirement fund. And if you look at, if you follow the trends of what sustainability is trying to achieve, you'll find that there are so many different, and sometimes conflicting definitions and strategies that are out there. And there are all sorts of taxonomies that are trying to determine what is the ultimate picture of what is being considered in the sustainability phase. So it's quite a daunting task for all sectors, right? So not just from a retirement fund perspective, but if we're just going back to the question around why workers are agitating around why are we not getting the value locally? Some of it is addressed in Regulation 28. But let me start by talking on the sustainability aspect of it. which is Xolisa's forte, but I'll just delve into it a little bit, and I'm sure that he can add quite substantially more than what I have to say. So the financial services industry already subscribes to international bodies as well as to local codes that try to localize our understanding of sustainability and hopefully its impact. So this concern around why aren't we investing locally is addressed in some of the codes that have been localized, right? And more recently, we had the relaunch of the CRISA code, which speaks to responsible investing within the South African perspective. And sustainable investing generally is supposed to generate positive impact for our economy. But when we're talking about workers' savings, there needs to be quite a lot more education for workers as well as for trustees so that they understand how the machinery works. And therefore, in understanding them, they can then be able to position the offering from their fund managers, but also try and drive investments sustainably for the impact that they're trying to achieve. So with this huge number of definitions that are out there, if it's not in the IPS, then it's not enforceable for them to achieve what they would like to achieve, right? So if the trustees have not engaged to the level where they say that the workers would like to have localized impact, and then embed that in the IPS and then enforce it and hold the fund managers accountable in that enforcement, then obviously that investment is not going to be directed along those lines. So it is quite important that the workers through the trustees use those mechanisms of the the investment mandate to make that investment a reality. So explicit mandates for the fund managers, and it must be quite clear what type of impact that they're trying to generate. So where exactly do they want to get that localized investment? So one example that is often cited is the truck stops by the Transport Sector Retirement Fund. So that investment is where the truck stops are essentially sustaining that industry and contributing positively directly to the members of the fund, because it's the workers who contribute to the retirement fund and who access those truck stops. So the question that members need to ask themselves and the trustees is, how can we use our money to contribute to the well-being of our ecosystem? And they need to drill it down to our industry, as in the industry that they're in, and that ultimately benefits their members and then the society at large. And that is what sustainable investments can achieve if they're understood and they're implemented and formalized strategically through the IPS. Then they will be able to start getting answers to why there is no localized impact.
Okay, I think,
okay.
Yes, I'm coming to go ahead.
Okay, no, I just wanted to add to that because, I was just reflecting on your question, because you also made the example to say if someone is working for a coal company, wants to invest in a coal company because they work there, why can't they do it? And I think it's not necessarily true that they can't do it. So going back to Regulation 28, and I think maybe let's paint a picture of Regulation 28. Yeah. Regulation 28 is a regulation that governs how investments are made into different types of asset classes, meaning are you buying shares? Are you borrowing? So you're going into a bond? Are you getting into a cash investment? So the regulation, it sits under the big umbrella of the Pension Funds Act. And it's specifically around giving guidance to the Board of Trustees to say, if you are wanting to invest, a certain portion of your assets can go into equities. And from that perspective, someone who works for, you know, mining company X, if that mining company X is listed and has a share that you can buy, they are still able to invest in that, but there's a limit to that, because if you are investing in the company that you're employed with, I think it's around a 5%. You can't have more than 5%. I stand corrected. I'll have to check. But there is a way to invest in a company you work for, but it is limited. So there are limits. And when it then comes to thinking about local, I think the question is how local is local, because in that same regulation, you know, there's a limitation in terms of how much can be invested locally and how much can be invested offshore. Offshore meaning outside of the country. And we've seen the regulation recently up the amount of the assets that can be invested outside of South Africa. So I think it's now up to 40%. Which is, I mean, it's debatable. Some may say it's not enough. Some say, no, it's a heck of a lot. And there are those who say maybe that money should be here in South Africa, but we're in South Africa because I think one of the grievances that workers typically kind of want to address is being able to see in a very tangible way how the money that is being deducted and invested in the market is actually benefiting their own local communities or where they come from. And what Amanda was referring to was this idea of impact investment, where you are investing to generate a financial return like you would in any kind of investment, but you also want to be able to generate either an environmental or a social impact through your investments. And that truck stop one, where effectively you had the pension fund of the transport sector saying that there are certain social risks that we need to address through investments that could ensure the sustainability of the sector. So with these long drives that these truck drivers, you know, have to participate in, they get tired, they typically don't have good nutrition. So these truck stops then become a place where they can rest, and they can rest with the cargo that they're driving being safe, and they can also be checked from a health perspective. And what does this do? It essentially increases the sustainability of the working of the sector, because now you have safety for the goods that are being transported, which is what makes the money, right? And you have the people who are doing this transportation being safe and being healthier than they were before. So now you can actually see what that social impact is, but yet they are still generating a financial return because these truck stops are run in a commercial way. And I wanted to paint that picture because then it feeds into the question, the big question that we are talking about today, to say, then how do workers then, you know, how can they get more out of their pension? Then they need to then start engaging differently with the board of trustees that they have entrusted, because they have given them a mandate to say, this is what we'd like. We want to get a financial return, but we want to be able to see impact in the communities we come from, because when they retire, they are likely to retire where they came from. So if they're not seeing the tangibility of those, the impact there, then it becomes problematic. And I think that's where the industry is moving to kind of put pressure on boards of trustees and pension funds to be able to then invest, but also from a local perspective, be as local as where you come from. Can I actually have the same lifestyle that I had when I was working in the city when I go back home? So can my money that I'm investing now that I don't have access to as an employee, can it actually help to do that? So how do I then make sure that my trustees who I've elected as a member are making sure that they're finding investable opportunities, or are pressuring the fund managers that they appoint to find investable opportunities that have this impact that is desired. So I wanted to add that in terms of, you know, your question, because I think when you speak about impact investment, that is how then you start exercising the power that you have as employees through the money that you have, by making sure that you engage differently and more proactively with the board of trustees who make the decisions on your behalf.
So I thought what is interesting, this truck example gives me the sense that you can, they're investing in assets. I mean, I guess a truck stop is, I'm trying to imagine it's like a garage on the way, right? Or something like that, where you can park.
So it's physical infrastructure.
Yeah.
It's infrastructure.
Yeah. But I wanted to also know whether or not these savings can also help you while you are still at work. You know, I mean, many of us, for example, have different kinds of challenges in the workplace, or there are certain opportunities. So on my day-to-day, you know, is there an opportunity that, I mean, you know, there are work benefits as we know them, but then there's potential for other things that to be able to happen. I think I mean, both of you will answer this question, but as you answer it also to this part where people are also asking to make sure that their savings can also help them today, perhaps debt, perhaps with buying a house, you know, the kinds of things that perhaps are not going to wait until the end. And how can we have that discussion with the savings that you already have to make you feel comfortable at work, even if, for example, we don't invest in a taxi that is going to bring it, you know, into the taxi environment. Could we invest in some way that I'm actually fairly happy at work as I go about my business on a daily basis?
I think that's a very interesting way to ask the question. But, you know, definitely there is a lot of a need for access to funds. Obviously, for a lot of people, the retirement savings are the only substantial savings that they have. And I think the COVID pandemic also pushed that to the fore quite a bit, where, you know, everyone was panicking. We had the multiple lockdowns, people are losing jobs, and people are saying, but I've got money, a substantial pot that I've saved up. How can I access it? But not only during the lockdown, I mean, in the past, people have wanted to have access to their funds in order to, like you rightly say, you know, buy a house or invest in a business. And that's the reason why we have this preservation issue in our country, because people would then resign at the end of the year, giving themselves a December bonus. And they would then use that money in whatever endeavor that they want to plow that money in. And then at the beginning of the year, they would then want to get back to their previous employment. So they would try and reapply to those jobs. But what the COVID-19 pandemic showed us was that those jobs were no longer accessible. Right, so it then puts a conundrum in, you know, in the mix, in that where there was jumping, you know, literally hopping in and out of the job market in order to access those funds and to use them in emergencies, or in, you know, in trying to, you know, fulfill your dream. You were essentially creating this hole that I had spoken about earlier on for your retirement. So the issue is definitely that the only way, the legislation currently has always been that you can access that money only by resigning or at retirement. So you couldn't like get access to that money before then. Recently, most people have heard about the two-part system, which is trying to address some of that enabling of accessing the money prior to retirement. But obviously, it means that you wouldn't want to provide people with the full access, because then we go back to the issue of preservation. So the two-part system is then structured in such a way that the contributions that Xolisa and I spoke about earlier on, that the employer draws from your salary and that go into your retirement pot, is now split into an accessible savings pot as well as a retirement pot. And the retirement pot is larger, as 2/3, and the savings pot is 1/3. But some of these recommendations that have come from National Treasury are only going to be implemented. Initially, it was anticipated from the 1st of March, 2023, but that has now been moved to 2024. And that's because it's such a complex, structure to administer. because there are certain Pension Funds Act requirements that also need to be abided by, that require a lot of administrative processes, understanding to be in place. And, even to the extent that the fund rules have to be changed. And remember, fund rules need to be approved by the FSCA, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. So there's so many moving parts in this process of enabling that access. Now, the issue that you rightly raise is that people need this money right now. And unfortunately, it means that this process is only going to be possibly go into effect only in 2024. So the agitation is still there, and there are still debates and discussions around what will it ultimately look like and how is it going to be implemented and administered.
Yeah. What was interesting was,
before you go in,
okay, sorry.
I just want to tell our attendees, so you can actually put up your hand to ask a question or to give a comment if there's something that you think you want to add to this discussion. I'm more than happy to take your comments or your questions. I think we're at that stage now because we're starting to engage quite nicely. So if there are questions, you want to talk or contribute or comment, please put up your hand, and then I will I'll allow you to do so, to be able to so just raise your hand. Xolisa, go ahead.
So, okay. Just before you go ahead, Xolisa, I just wanted to add some statistics which actually come from Sanlam, the benchmark survey, which surveys the retirement funds. It revealed that there were more than 50% of respondents that knew about the two-part system. So it has become quite evident in some of the discussions that the news about the enactment or the implementation of the two-part system has started to proliferate. Quite a substantial number of people agree with it. Currently 56% at the most recent survey, and quite a lot of people also, 62% said they would increase their retirement savings and that they would most likely not withdraw, right? So they would not access that savings pot because they recognize that when the pandemic hit, and I think in instances where people saw that there was real value in investing for or saving for their retirement fund, as you keep drawing from it, you are limiting your the potential of retaining or maintaining your lifestyle post-retirement. So it makes sense to keep the money invested. And people have started becoming more financially conscious and more financially savvy in terms of the importance of investing and the importance of retaining your savings, because then when it accumulates, then you take advantage of the compound interest.
Khoza, wanted to say something?
Yeah, in terms of addressing your question, I think we just need to go back to the purpose of retirement fund. It's a vehicle that is saving for your time at retirement. So it has a very specific purpose, right? And when you look at even the two-part system debate and discourse that is happening that Amanda alluded to, has been really around how do you then access this money sooner than retirement. And this has been happening, for time immemorial, because when you actually even look at why we speak of provident funds, it was also to address access. So when you had pension funds, which were very clear that if you leave employment or you need to withdraw, you can only take a third as cash, the other two must remain in a pension fund or need to be preserved in another pension fund or transferred to another pension fund, but not used for consumption. So I think this two-part system is another, like a variation of, trying to have that access, but ideally you should not be trying to access this because it has a very specific purpose of allowing the individual to save for retirement so that by the time they reach retirement, they've accumulated assets, financial assets to buy a pension. And then during their pension years, they're able to draw that income. And we are not, we can't be aloof to the difficulties from a financial perspective, right? But that's where I think you also then need to, as an individual who's contemplating wanting to withdraw, ideally you should not be even withdrawing for consumption, because the idea is to say, if you're withdrawing, at least invest. The example you gave around buying a taxi, you're buying something that can generate money going forward. So it's a very different thing from taking that money and going to, I don't know, you fix your kitchen unit for a house that you are not going to sell, or a house that you're not renting out, right? So I think what I really wanted to highlight, without going into what Amanda was saying, is that in thinking about this and all these debates, the individual and the worker needs to firstly consider why pension funds came to be in the first place and what their purpose is, which is to enable investment for retirement. And I think this two-part system, when we speak about the third 2/3, going back to what I was saying, that with a pension fund, that was always the case. When Providence Fund came to be, they were then allowing members or individuals who would probably struggle to get a new job to be able to access all their money. So you could get 100%, but that has even changed, where now even provident funds need to adhere to the 1/3 cash and 2/3 preservation rule. And I think that needs to be borne in mind when thinking about withdrawing.
So on withdrawing, in this thing, for example, of say you want to save your house. Many people may be in trouble financially, they want to save their house, or they want to, many of us who want to start a business, or even to actually buy a house in a substantial way. Remember, some people say, if I could take this money and buy a house on auction. One of the things that I get asked, my mother's friends are retiring, many of my mother's friends are retiring, or have retired in the past few years. And the question, many of them are starting, what they do is they'll call and say, look, I've now received this money. I'd like to pay off my house, because during their lifetime, they were not able, for example, to be able to finish that house because of raising children, single mothers, and all that. So they say, if they had the opportunity, because look, most of that money is going in to buy a house, or to actually buy or to pay off the house, which means actually there's very little that's left for them to actually continue to live for an extended period of time, as opposed to maybe had they had the opportunity earlier. But I a number of other scenarios in which perhaps this sort of two-part system can work. But mostly, if it is there are all these questions in the time that you're saving. Again, we know we live in a country that doesn't have the kind of incomes where people can do both saving on the side for that wedding, or for giving your child the best wedding they could have, or all of those things that are quite important for all people. So in terms of trying to balance that, where does that all fit in? But also basically living comfortably in the years that you are working, rather than in the years after you work. And that's why I asked the question, because I think there might be something about how we think about your savings, especially when it is a regulated saving, as will be this.
Can I just add something there?
Okay. Go ahead.
No, I want to say, and I think it's coming from what you mentioned around the Sanlam benchmark. I'm not trying to pan Sanlam benchmark, but I think it's a very important piece of research, because there's a lot of stuff that we interrogated in terms of gathering the data for the benchmark. So it wasn't just retirement funds, but also individuals. So it was individuals who are basically saying, yes, there's a talk around making this provision for early access, but I think people are also realizing that because the purpose of the retirement fund is to save for retirement, you're seeing it in the stats in terms of the responses saying that I'm actually not necessarily trying to access my money sooner than I need to. In fact, I would like to increase my contribution towards the saving. And in order to, again, be aligned to the mission and the objective of being in a retirement fund to begin with. But I think in the instance that we say, we can't be aloof to the realities of our people in the country. And I think that's where education becomes important, because then you can say, really think about it. Yes, you have this desire to finish off the house or extend the house. Meanwhile, maybe the question you should ask differently is that, is this house sufficient for my needs? Because if that's the case, then the money that I'm earmarking could be maybe used differently to actually still be aligned to investing for the future.
That's why
so then it is around making that financial education. And I think we've been doing that a lot with Salam, with Imali Zami, to basically ask those questions, because you can even then start making decisions around how much you want to contribute. Because in some employers, they actually give you the choice to say, do you want 27.5% of your salary, or do you want 10% of your salary invested towards retirement? And then I think if you have that financial education, then people can start making decisions that are, from a financial perspective, perhaps more beneficial for them in the future, considering that we don't necessarily know how long we will live. Because I think that's one thing that we also need to realize, that yes, if you have a house, do you really need a new kitchen? If you have a house, it's one thing if you're building. It's one thing if you're building a house, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing if you're building a house, and yes, and then it is something that will accrue in terms of capital gain. But if you're going to take advantage of the capital gain, you're going to have to get rid of that house at some point so that you can actually get the gain, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's where the financial education becomes very key and very important, to then help ourselves and our people to then think very wisely about the decisions they make from a financial perspective, to be able to now start making a differentiation between what is a need, what is a want, and what implications does it have on my retirement later on, when I don't know how long I will live.
So let me ask you this, because I think just referring to this benchmark study, because I think that's quite interesting in terms of how many people answered and were aware of this two-part system. And it seems to me that it's telling, Amanda, you may answer this, it's fine, that the Salam study, where you've reached out to people and people say, well, we are aware of this, means actually they are quite aware, and it's something that they need. We ordinarily, our antennas tend to go off. Our ears are always tuned to the kinds of things that we think could benefit us, or things that could help us. With all the information, people have, 75% is not a small number for people to know that this is something that's out there that can help. So I wanted to say, doesn't this mean that actually it is really something that people need if they've paid so much attention to it? But I know you wanted to say something else.
No, I just wanted to comment on the house situation and the house example. So interestingly, the Indonesian retirement fund, I think it's the central retirement fund, which is the main fund, is structured in a way that is quite similar to, I think, where the two-part system draws some of its inspiration. However, the access to the savings component lies outside of the retirement fund. So when a member signs up, they are given options, so which are a number of pots where their contribution can go into. One is housing, one is savings, one is health, and then there's the retirement fund, right? So they are separated. So you can actually, through your employer, save for a house, because that option is available. And so, one radical way of solving for this issue of access would have been to have have it as an employee benefit that sits outside of the retirement fund, because then it doesn't impact your retirement fund saving process, right? But yeah, so I just wanted to give you that anecdotal insight. But I also wanted to add to what Xolisa was saying around education. The financial services sector is supposed to provide financial education as part of its financial sector code. So they are mandated to provide financial education. And in the recent amendments of the financial sector code, and I know that you had a discussion around triple BE and all of that, I think in your previous podcast, was that there is an allocation for retirement fund financial education. So most of it goes directly to the trustees when the financial education is afforded. However, this is an opportunity to drill down and go to the members as well and provide financial education there, because at the point of accessing that savings pot, it's going to be the members that are requesting that access, not the retirement fund trustees. And if they are not financially educated or aware or savvy enough to be able to make informed decisions about whether to access that money or to leave it for retirement, then they will use the little knowledge that they have. So I think the onus is on the trustees to ensure that their financial services service providers drive financial education for their members. A lot of the financial services companies might do like broad-based financial education outside of their consumer base, and members and retirement funds become part of their consumer base or their clients. So it is important for trustees to also now start driving that requirement through their financial services service providers, so that they can be able to educate and empower their members.
So let me ask maybe this differently, because I wanted to also to take us back maybe to the discussion about how workers themselves engage this process. I was listening to you outline the kinds of regulations that exist and how difficult it is to switch from one thing to the other, and how difficult it is for workers, for example, to make a particular choice. And it had me thinking whether or not actually there are no better ways to actually do this engagement of workers and their needs. I mean, we've now been discussing the workers' immediate needs, but I suspect workers also have bigger needs. I mean, we talked about sustainability. It seems to me that's a much broader and a bigger thing. That's sort of open, a mind-opening thing. But say, some of these decisions. So we want to invest in solar. So, for example, we think about solar in townships, and we want to be able to support businesses that are in the townships that are going to put in renewable energy. You know what I mean? For the purpose of ending load shedding, and so we want to be able to participate in that. We may also want, for example, and I think maybe I wanted to give you some answers to this, but also about there's a big discussion around fund managers. I mean, you work for a fund management firm that is this money maybe given to the right hands of people who can think about these things in a manner that maybe may resonate. I don't know if that could be true with the sort of the workers that are maybe not being heard, but may if they gave it to those hands, maybe black fund managers, for example, that might be a discussion to be had about where your money is being allocated. I know at the beginning when we started here, Amanda, you really talked about there are decisions that are made right at the beginning. For example, the principles of the fund, how it's going to be divided, who is going to be given to. All of these things are discussions that maybe workers may want to engage in. How do we actually, in the end, engage in all these big discussions? Where do they start? How do they actually sort of formulate those kinds of discussions? Because, as I say, it's not just about their immediate needs, but they've got other bigger things that I think people care about, they want implemented. Xolisa, I'll start with you.
Okay, phew. It's a big question, and okay, so I'll give you the context from where I sit now at Salam Corporate. I'm not in the fund management business, but the cluster that we are in, we provide corporate solutions which are largely employee benefits, so retirement aspects, etc. And I also sit then on the one of the capabilities or aspects that we offer to the market is the Sanlam Umbrella Fund. And I sit on the investment committee of that umbrella fund. And what's been very tricky is that, you know, you're asking what can the individual at the micro level, at the ground level do to influence. And the way it's playing out in this umbrella situation, it's that you still have the mechanism. That's why when I started, I mentioned how the governance structure of a pension fund works, is that you have a board of trustees who those individuals have elected at least half of that board, but the entire board is accountable to the individuals. So the board of trustees effectively has a mandate from the individuals, the employees, amongst other stakeholders. And so when individuals want to express their preference or their desire around where investment should go, that is, they could then engage directly with their board of trustees. And unfortunately, sometimes when you actually ask people, they don't even know that who is actually sitting on the board, and some of them do not even participate in the election of the trustees. But those who do, then that is a mechanism that is already there. You can, if you've elected someone as a trustee, you can call them, email them to say, listen, I know that you are part of the decision-making body around where my assets are invested. How are you looking at investing in this particular thing, whether it's renewable energy or not? And then when it comes to the umbrella fund in this instance, we can make the platform available for those wishes to be implemented. So it then again falls upon the board of trustees to say, how do they then, through the investment policy that Amanda was speaking about, basically structure how they make decisions, and how do they also incorporate the voice of the members in constructing an investment strategy that may go into renewable energy or sanitation or or in terms of social infrastructure. So that is one mechanism, right, along the occupational retirement fund space. But individuals can also start influencing where the market channels money in their individual capacity through the retail side, where they basically could say, over and above my pension fund where I've given my voice, I can also go into a retirement annuity, or even within, for example, the umbrella fund, choose a portfolio which resonates with what I want. So then you use your choice as a member of the options that are made available to you by the umbrella to make a choice to say, this portfolio resonates with me wanting to channel assets into renewable energy or investments that address climate change, because that's what I care about as an individual. And then the umbrella just makes sure that they create an environment in such a way that it enables that choice to be made, and also then the education that needs to be there for someone to make a decision. Because when you're selecting a fund manager, it's not a picky mabulani. You actually have to do a research. You need to understand where you're putting your money, because these are people who are going to make money on your behalf. So I think it's very useful for individuals and workers and me and you to have a very good understanding of the governance structure and what our rights and responsibilities are as individuals who have entrusted another, like a higher layer or body, to make decisions on our behalf. And what was interesting, when I was at UCT and I was a trustee there, one of the things that we embarked on while I was still a trustee was to actually just survey the members. Instead of guessing to say, does Xhanti want renewable energies? Does Amanda want, social housing? Okay, let's take away the guesswork. Let's ask the people what they want and try our best as a board of trustees to give the people what they want. So I think then that's something that can be done by all sorts of pension funds. So it's understanding what the structure of the governance structure is, who is accountable to you as an individual, but also other avenues to express your desire from a financial perspective, whether it's your individual investments, choices that you make for a unit trust, or also then making sure that, you know, you can agitate the board of trustees to say, come, we want you to actually hear our voices, go through a mechanism where you can get our thoughts and opinions and we would like, and then basically make a decision based on the insights you get from that.
Okay, thanks for that.
I just want to,
Yeah,
I don't have much to add to what Xolisa said. He said a mouthful, and I think he's covered all the bases. But I think what's key from what he has said is you need to be an active member, right? You can't be passive and, you know, making comments without engaging. Otherwise, there won't be any change, right? The status quo will remain. You know, a lot of members of trustee funds, when they are asked to make an election, and if they don't make an election, then they'll, you know, fall into the default portfolio. The majority end up not making an election, they fall into the default portfolio. So in the same vein, when communication comes out in terms of these, this is the structure, so there'll be a portfolio one-pager, which basically gives you the fund facts. These are the managers, this is the mix of the asset classes, these are the areas where this particular fund or portfolio is invested in, and people hardly access that information, but it's typically readily available, right? And at the minute you have access to that, or you access it, so you are active as a member, you can then make an informed decision as to, I want my money to be directed in this manner. So if there is one fund that is, you know, has a sustainability structure to it, and the conversations, the desktop conversations and the WhatsApp conversations say, but we want our money to be invested sustainably. If all those members, then when they made the election, elected that fund, that's the direction that their retirement fund is going to invest in. So the important thing is, you know, be active and be involved in what happens in your retirement fund. And there are multiple mechanisms, as Xolisa has mentioned, that you can use to access and be able to engage.
Let me ask you this, because I think I want to start going towards closing. You know, there's a lot of things, there's lots in the news about people being called to come and claim their savings or their parents' retirement. So, you know, there's a lot of that has been happening. Is that a sign of this kind of thing where people are not informed in terms of I didn't know or I wasn't told? Which one is the bigger side of it, if you know? Because if there is one thing where people were not told, so there are deductions that go off your salary, you don't know whether it's tax or whatever, so you were not told or you were not informed, or you know, or I'm not informed, I did not engage, as we're saying that we all have to engage. Because I think part of this, the thing is, you know, workers, for example, will know something about increases into their salaries. I got a 6% increase, I got a 6%. That is something that's known, something we agitate for all the time. But whether or not people are agitating for, do I have, how much will I get when I leave work? Where is that money sitting? What do I tell my child? You know, should they go looking for this money? Those kinds of things. Where is that information sitting? And how can people actually fully engage with it?
They're absolutely informed. So they might not be accessing the, you know, the communication that is sent out, but I don't know of if there are any funds that are in breach of not communicating. Obviously, the FSCA will jump on them, right? Because it's a requirement. It's part of the conduct standards, right? You have to communicate. So members, first and foremost, at the very beginning, when an employee signs up into a retirement fund, they have to provide the beneficiary list, right? So some members don't even keep that up to date. So when they exit or they pass away, unfortunately, then the money cannot be distributed to beneficiaries because other beneficiaries don't exist, they can't be found, maybe there's name changes, or it's beneficiaries that actually, if they are found, there are people that you actually didn't want to give that money to, right? So it's quite important to review your beneficiary list on a regular basis. I belong to a preservation fund, and on a quarterly basis, I get a benefit statement, which all members are in the retirement fund space have access to. And in the benefit statement, it tells me where the money is invested, and it also lists my beneficiaries, right? So in that process of receiving it, the onus is on you to then reassess, have I allocated my money correctly? Are the details still valid and relevant? And then update them if needs be. The unclaimed benefit space is huge. There are literally billions that are unclaimed, which is so unfortunate when people pass away and their dependents are left with nothing, whereas a person has been working for the last 20 odd years and there actually is money in the pot for them. So it's and that's the reason why I'm saying you have to be active, read the communication, look at, update your data and make sure that it's current and relevant.
Okay. Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add there is really around even the access has been made a bit easier. I suppose that's also debatable because what you'll start seeing, or I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of work around digitizing a lot of the engagements that you would have with financial services providers in general. And it's not different in the retirement fund space. So, when Amanda was talking about a benefit statement, you don't actually need to now wait for the end of the quarter to get a physical piece of paper. I can speak for Sanlam Umbrella Fund. Our digital strategy is in making sure that inclusion aspect becomes tangible. So you can then engage your benefits in right time. So if you can access Facebook or Instagram on your phone, you'll be able to engage your benefits, whether it's medical aid or retirement, via a digital platform or a digital instrument that allows you to then be able to know these things, but also update, I'm a beneficiaries. If we don't have beneficiaries, it's similar to if you don't have a will, someone now needs to figure out who was a financial beneficiary and hunt them down and then make sure that they are legitimate as that before handing out the money. But if you have a member who has completed their beneficiary forms and kept them updated, it makes things a bit easier. Yes, the board of trustees will still have to do this prudent search to say, are there other people who were perhaps omitted from the beneficiary list who should be getting the money because they were financial dependents. So you do have mechanisms and tools that allow you to access these things a bit easier. And I mentioned that the education aspect, that is also something that is going in the market where, from a Sanlam perspective, we talk about the Malizam campaign, but the idea is to then say, understand that, yes, you can access this digitally, but what are you accessing? Do you understand what you're accessing? And what kind of decisions are you making? Everything from how much of a contribution do I want to make? Which investment portfolio do I want my money to be invested in if you have a member choice? And even how my benefit would be dispersed should I die before I reach retirement.
Okay, I want us to round it up. So I know the guys who have been listening as attendees or participants, if you want to ask questions or you want to contribute, please do. Just put up your hand. But here are the two questions I would like us to close with. The first one is, people say this, I know this is how we started this conversation. They say, I want, when I retire, so when I go home, I would like that there is some, my money would have done something ahead of me arriving. So, for example, develop rural areas, or I want to do different things. Now, these are discussions that workers are having. These are discussions that are being, people are asking on radio stations. If they had to do that, where would they start? So how would someone start that conversation, whether they are talking to their neighbor, whether they are talking to a co-worker? How do they start that conversation? Where do they take it to? Because I think that's important. Who do you call immediately and say, look, we want to have a meeting, or we've gathered ourselves? So that's the first question that I think I want us to ask. The second one is, how does one build this understanding? Because I think it's easy for us, we talk about digital platforms. It's taken some people some time to be able to log onto Zoom and all of that. And it had to be under such pressure that you want to attend a loved one's funeral. How do people actually sort of get that culture of sort of reading this stuff? Who should they be, at whose door should they be knocking to say, I want a statement that's accessible, even if I get an SMS at the end of the month that says, you have 3,000 Rand, well, 2,000 is invested in this, that they're actually informed. So there's also this, because we keep talking about people must get information, and we keep talking about people must engage. And those, how do people do that practically?
From my perspective, I think, firstly, go to your HR. Because I get HR, because when you go to HR, they are the custodians of also your employee benefits. And they would then be able to go to HR and ask a simple question, which is, who are your trustees? And what are the mechanisms that do you have for you to voice your desires or needs to this board of trustees? Because once you know who are the decision makers, the governing body, and the mechanism to reach them, then you can then start that engagement. It starts as early as, firstly, understand who your trustees are, and how do you then, how do you reach them? And your HR business partner should be able to help you with that. And I've already mentioned that we do have these, there are apps available. Again, I'll speak for Sanlam, I can't speak for others, but we have a Sanlam app, for instance, that where you can, even if you don't work for Sanlam, as someone who is in a pension fund that is administered by Sanlam, you'll be able to say, this is how much I have in my savings, this is through this app. So the next part is understand what digital platform, or not just what platforms are available for you to access the information. So if it's an app, download the app again, or at least know how to access it in the internet, so that you're able to at least then access the information and know where to go get it. Because if you're able to access it, especially through a digital platform, then you have a variety of data points that you can then start collecting to help you chart your next point, to say, okay, if you're happy with the choices or the portfolios, then you probably don't need to do anything. But if you think there could be better portfolios that were more suitable for you, then you can then have something to start with, to say, I've looked at my portfolios through this app, and I'm not seeing a portfolio that resonates with my desire for renewable energy. So then you go to either the investment committee of that board, or the board entirely, to say, we'd like to know what you've done to actually explore this, and can you actually make it happen in such a way that it doesn't take away from me still being able to generate a return to actually accumulate assets for retirement. So I think for me, that's a beginning stage. Everything else can be,
Okay. Then there's a bigger question, Amanda, for you, in terms of, of this regulation 28, the changes that are being made about, investing in infrastructure, for the 45% being investable, at least offshore, so you can actually, that money can be taken out. There are engagements with people, I guess, we're not finished with those. Are those engagements still going on, or are those finished? And how would people actually start sort of just, contribute to be heard if they want to be heard about these kinds of discussions? But that's one question. But I wanted to close this about, what are your concerns about some of the changes that are happening, or what are the things that excite you about some of the changes that are happening in people's retirement?
Well, I think, we literally have just a few seconds. So just very briefly, in terms of Regulation 28, it has been amended. Okay. So the amendment has been concluded. The 45% allocation is promulgated, and this is for offshore right? And I think, a number of key factors that one needs to consider, especially when it relates to the question that you asked about, I want to retire emakhaya, what's the impact? The majority of funds have been investing retirement fund money on listed assets, which are listed on the JSE, right? And with this 45% allocation, there's potential of 45% maximum going offshore. And which then means that there is no local impact. And because essentially, if you look at the investments on listed companies, it's literally a matter of buying shares, which is merely a change of ownership and is not necessarily an investment in impacting or tangibly seeing the difference that investment will have directly into the country. So I think some of the Regulation 28 is allowing for greater investment into unlisted shares or private equity companies. And there are quite a few, big social and responsible investment benefits in allocating capital to these private equity businesses as well, because if you understand how private equity works, they work with, they invest in projects locally, which are potentially meant to better corporate citizens, so the businesses that they invest in. So driving investment into infrastructure, as well as potentially increasing employment levels as well. So the Regulation 28 also has increased an allocation in infrastructure. Xolisa spoke about things like social infrastructure as well, over and above the energy and the power, that can potentially assist in areas where there is, dire lack of that kind of infrastructure. Emakhaya, the roads that need to be built, hospitals that need to be accessed locally rather than them driving to the larger metros. So I think that's quite important. And I think just my last comment is a tip in terms of increasing your engagement with your retirement fund is when you if you set your checks according to your birthday. So if you do your medical checks every year around your birthday, then you can do your retirement fund checks around your birthday. If you are not access it, in real time, like Xolisa was mentioning, at the very least, put that in your diary that when it comes to your birthday, the gift for yourself is to do your medical checks as well as to check on your retirement fund investments, which includes all the things that are on your benefit statements.
Okay, thanks very much, Amanda. I think we have to wrap it up there. Just to tell everybody that we will take this conversation and put it into a recorded insights report. So the things that have been said here will sort of be brought together thematically so that actually other people can take them on board and be able to engage with them. And we will post all of this. So this video will be on YouTube as soon as we've cut it properly, and then all the insights reports will be available. The next discussion will be about savings that are in people's hands in terms of the stokvels and communal savings, and how that can actually also benefit people and how that can be invested appropriately and what we've seen before, which has also been mainly short-term spending. So that's Xolisa Dhlamini, who has been with us from Sanlam Corporate, and then of course Amanda Khoza, who has her own business. Amanda's business is, let me see, remind me.
Root Cause Consult.
Root Cause Consult. Thank you so much. I love that. Really, thank you so much, guys, for your input, and thank you to the listeners, to the people that have listened to us, the attendees, for spending their time with us. and have a good night. And thank you, Eskom, for keeping us alive. Cheers, everybody.
Thank
Oh,
you.
well, I'm in the dark.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.